The good news is we're all in this together. And when we see we're together, we can work things out. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey, me, and the amazing, invisible Tom Fennell. Actually, Tom hurt his knee, so he's out today, but I'm going to fill in for him. And I will start off with my usual explanation of what's going on. Every day I get up early. Today I happen to be up at about 3:30. And I go through the news looking for whatever I can find about energy and climate change. And I put up articles that I find that are interesting at my blog, geoharvey.com. The articles relate to just about anything that has to do with energy and climate change. And I put them up so people can read whatever has happened in the previous 24 hours. The articles each get a synopsis, which is about 50 or 55 words, with a link to the original. And these are all assembled in a group, single posting that goes up with 10 or 15 items in it. Today is the 24th of May, and I'm starting the report that I'm doing for this week on the previous Thursday, which is May 17th, and this week's report will go from May 17th through May 23rd. If you see anything on the show that you'd like to read about, you can go to the blog, geoharvey.com, and either scroll down or click on the calendar on the date that you find there and pick out the item that you're interested in from the post that went up that day. The first post that we're going to have this week, and now I've got a malfunction of a computer. There we go. Let's make it work. The first post for the week is from Clean Technica, and it relates to an announcement that came out of India. The Solar Energy Corporation of India announced plans to issue a tender for 2 gigawatts of solar and wind energy capacity. The Solar Energy Corporation of India will auction 1 gigawatt of solar and 1 gigawatt of wind energy capacity at a location to be disclosed once the actual tendered documents are released. Combining solar and wind power will optimize the transmission system. What is happening here is, first of all, these are very big tenders. A gigawatt of solar is approximately a quarter, perhaps, of a modern nuclear power plant. A gigawatt of wind is perhaps half. And when you combine them together, you're in a situation where you can make ideal use of the energy that you're getting, because generally speaking, when solar power is available, the wind is not blowing as hard as it does at night and during the winter. So this helps balance the entire system. And of course, more and more we're seeing batteries come up with systems of that type. Here is a picture of a wind and solar farm and I believe that actually is in India, although it might not be. Anyway, I will go on to the next item. Queensland state-owned transmission company PowerLink says it has received inquiries about 30 gigawatts of new generation projects, almost all of them renewables. Now, if 2 gigawatts was perhaps 2/3 or 3/4 of a nuclear plant, you can see that this is the equivalent of half a dozen nuclear plants or more. PowerLink said it signed connection agreements for up to 500 megawatts, half a gigawatt, with Pacific Hydro for the first stage of the Houghton solar farm. But this is just one of 150 potential projects. One thing that I should point, this by the way comes from Renew Economy. One thing that I should point out about this is that since the introduction of the big Tesla battery in South Australia, I have seen more and more deals being done in Australia that involve big batteries. And part of the reason for that is because the big battery in South Australia has actually been paying for itself handsomely. In fact, it cost the government of South Australia $50 million Australian dollars, which are about 3/4 of an American dollar, to have it installed. But it saved something like $35 million in the first 4 months of operation. So this is obviously something that is very beneficial. It doesn't merely back up solar and wind power. It also reduces the cost of power, and in fact, that battery reduced the cost of the power that would be produced by peaking plants by about 90%. And that particular kind of saving that has been happening as a result of that is being noticed by just about everybody who is interested in this sort of thing. And so I'm seeing solar farms and wind farms being bid with or offered with batteries involved as well, and in fact batteries being installed all by themselves in a lot of different places. One thing that we should recognize here is that batteries are not just useful for renewable energy. Batteries have been useful for backup for fossil fuels and nuclear plants for a long time. And as a matter of fact, here near Brattleboro, we had the Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Plant, which was built in 1973. Also built in 1973 was the Northfield Mountains Power Station, which is just about 20 miles down the river. And that station takes water from the Connecticut River and pumps it to the top of a mountain. And then whenever the price of power is sufficiently low to do that, and then when the spot price of power becomes sufficiently high, they run the water back down to make money selling it. And this was built in 1973 because the Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Plant was going to be generating power in a way that is extremely inflexible, which means that it would not be sufficient to meet daytime demands, but it would be too much to meet nighttime demands. So it was necessary to it's necessary to take up those nighttime demands, because you can't reduce the power being fed onto the grid. I'm being a little bit simplistic here. And that made the Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Plant run more effectively, because the power, any excess that it was producing was taken up, and any shortfall in its power production was provided for out of that Northfield station. Now, the Vermont Yankee is closed, but the Northfield Mountain project is still going. That particular item is from Renew Economy. The next item is from Twin Cities Business Magazine, still on Thursday, May 17th. With tariffs from the Trump administration and an energy market in flux, the solar economy faces a degree of uncertainty. But in Minnesota, the sector is stronger than in most states. Last year, solar jobs dropped 4% nationwide, while in Minnesota, they rose 48.2% to a total of 4,256, according to Solar Jobs Census. That's 4,256 jobs. This is happening because in Minnesota, there's more support, you might say, for solar and actually for wind than there has been in other states. And in fact, this puts to mind something that happened about 6 years ago, I think. It might have been 5 years ago, but I remember that a solar farm bid against a set of natural gas powered peaking plants and won the bid. And the people who had put up the bids for the peaking plants objected that the price for the solar power was actually higher. But it was taken when it was taken to a court to get straightened out. The court said that it believed that the people in the I don't know whether it was the public service department or what in Minnesota, but the people who made the decisions had chosen solar for the reason that in the long term it would be cheaper, even though the current prices were higher. And the reason was because natural gas was at a very low price, and it was probably not going to go down. It had already been depressed by fracking. And so the thought was that the solar panels would save money in the long run. And the result of that was that solar 5 or 6 years ago was beating out natural gas for the peaking plants. Now what's happened is that solar power is beating out natural gas combined cycle plants. And the result of that is that the only thing that holds solar back when it's put up against natural gas is the fact that it doesn't go at night. But what we're seeing from South Australia is that the battery backup that seems to be required for solar is providing services of its own that have economic reasons for existing. This article, by the way, is from Twin Cities Business Magazine. We are up to Friday, May 18th, and we have an item from CNN, which is what this picture is related to. Whoops, this picture. I'm not used to operating all of this stuff by myself, so please pardon me. And here I've got a funny picture on the screen. There we go. For 400 consecutive months, which is over 33 years, the Earth's temperature has been above average, and climatologists are not mincing words as to why. The dubious milestone was reported in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's monthly climate report. It also says this April had the third warmest of any April since NOAA began collecting such records in 1880. The picture here, of course, has nothing specifically relating to energy. One of the problems I've got is I'm doing Tom's work and mine. So if Tom ever looks like he's a deer in the headlights, I must look like a deer in the headlights tripping over his tongue. This reminds me a little bit of, what was it, Prairie Home Companion, where all the women were strong and all the children were above average. This is 400 consecutive months at above average, and there's no question that the climate change is well underway. It has not paused. The pause that people were talking about a few years ago was a statistical blip that was extrapolated erroneously. And we are coming to that in the next item, which comes from Newsmax. That item has to do with Jim Bridenstine, who is the NASA administrator now. A report from The Atlantic said that NASA's Trump-appointed new administrator, Jim Bridenstine, told a town hall meeting, quote, "Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We're putting it into the atmosphere in volumes that we haven't seen, and that greenhouse gas is warming the planet. That is absolutely happening, and we are responsible for it," end quote. What happens here is that Jim Bridenstine was a Republican Party representative in the House of Representatives in Washington from the state of Oklahoma. And he had been a climate denier. He'd been one of the people who had talked in standing up and giving speeches in Congress saying that climate change had been on a pause, wasn't going on, And he was appointed by the Trump administration to be NASA's administrator, and he said that his view on climate change is evolving. And as a matter of fact, today I saw in the news Jim Bridenstine had said something almost identical to this again when he was asked about climate change by a member of Congress. Bridenstine is no longer a member of Congress. He is the NASA administrator. NASA has had spending cuts that are related to measuring carbon dioxide and climate change, and it's been disheartening to a lot of people to see those cuts happening. But now we've got a NASA administrator who is standing up and I think rather bravely saying that climate change is a problem and we are causing it with carbon dioxide by burning fuel. So it's perhaps the beginning of a change in Washington, which we will see in other items also in this week's news. The next item that we have here is from PV Magazine Australia. The U.S. solar sector employs more workers than the coal and nuclear industries combined. A report from a think tank headed by former U.S. Energy Secretary Monitz shows that some solar jobs are typically uncounted, and 100,000 jobs have a part-time solar component. The report hints at the political powerhouse that solar is becoming. And again, this is something that has come up elsewhere in the news this week. Basically what's happening is they're saying that the hundreds of thousands of people who are reportedly employed in the solar industry are not all the people there. And these part-time jobs had never been counted, but they are jobs that are dependent on the industry. And this, by the way, is somewhat related to a problem that the Energy Information Administration has had over the years. It has consistently underestimated the amount of capacity and the amount of production associated with solar power in the United States. And 2 years ago, they decided that they were going to address that. They admitted that this was going on. They were underestimating these things. Part of the reason they were underestimating them was because in counting energy installations, the Department of Energy had historically only counted those installations that were of 1 megawatt or 5 megawatts and greater, and the difference between 1 and 5 being the reason for the counting. But they were never interested in such things as small generators because they didn't really have much effect on the overall energy picture. It happens that with solar power, well over 95% of the installations are small. And although those are small, the sheer number of them makes up a large part of the solar installation in volume. And typically it may be 40% or more of the capacity and the production. And they, of course, have no way of counting this. It's even worse when you consider that, for counting it, that some of that production is not even associated with the grid. Some of it is people making their own solar power. And so that has been a problem in trying to figure out how much solar power there is. And generally speaking, what I do is when I'm trying to think of the amount of capacity there might be out there, I take the figure that I had taken the figure that they provided and multiplied it by about 1.5 to 2, somewhere in there. And basically, they are trying to take all those jobs and that capacity and that production into account, but they've been just barely scratching the surface of putting together how to do that, and I don't think they're planning on having that job done this year. We are up to Saturday, May 19th, and we have a report from New Atlas, and a picture here, which I will put up if I can figure out how to do it. There we go. This is a picture of Crescent Dunes solar thermal capacity, and the item that we have here is starts with a question. Could renewable energy sources meet 100% of our energy demand? And the answer is yes, according to new research that scrutinizes the arguments against that idea. Quote, there are no roadblocks on the way to a 100% renewable future, end quote. The research states, while pointing out that existing research already holds the answers to common objections raised. And what has happened with this particular item, which I'm taking from New Atlas, but it's been all over the internet for the last week, I think since perhaps Friday, there have been multiple articles on this every day. The question was raised by a report that came out last year saying that we could not get to a 100% use of renewable energy. We have to have non-renewable energy in the mix. And that was according to this new report, which was produced by scientists at a number of universities who were working together. They basically looked deeply into that article that said that we could not get to a 100% renewable energy situation. And they took it apart point by point and said, yes, we can in the end. And one of the things that they did here was they pointed out that there are countries that are already at 100%. Now, this has been true for years. For example, Paraguay, and they didn't mention this in the article, but Paraguay has produced about 1,000% of the electricity that it needs pretty consistently for quite a few years because they have huge hydropower capacity that has been tapped, and they are selling most of that power to Argentina and Brazil. But small countries have been coming online. Tokelau was, I think, the first to be 100% solar powered. They have diesel backup at Tokelau, but it's solar and battery for most of what's going on there. And the diesel backup is powered by locally manufactured biodiesel. So it's 100% renewable energy that comes either from the sun or from, as I understand it, waste oils from food processing. And this looks at countries like Costa Rica, which has been at close to 100% renewable. Norway, which has been close to 100% renewable. Both of those very largely from hydropower, but now we're getting to past 100% renewable in German states, in North Germany, where the states are exporting electricity, and the electricity that they use internally is 100% renewable, and that is being stretched to a point where it's not just the electricity on the grid, but it's also being used for heating and it's being used for transportation. So that report that had come out saying that this was not possible has been refuted by a counter report. Okay, from a publication called Reveal, we have another of these things that's been coming from the from Washington, D.C., indicating a kind of a change in the situation in Washington. The National Park Service released a report showing risks to national parks from sea level rise and storms. The report drafts obtained earlier by Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting showed that officials had deleted every mention of human-caused climate change in the report. How you would be able to get from no mention of human-caused climate change to sea level rise, I'm not sure. But at any rate, that's what had happened in that report. Every mention of human-caused climate change had been removed. But after a long delay, the report was published with the references restored. Again, this indicates that there are people who are in control of what's going on in Washington who are starting to switch from denial of climate change into new positions, or as Jim Bridenstine said, their position is evolving. And we will get to more instances that relate exactly to the National Park Service and this particular report as this issue of Energy Week goes on. On the same day, Saturday, May 19th, we had a report from Global Banking and Finance Review. And what this says is a report from Microsoft Corporation shows significant energy and carbon emissions reduction potential from the use of Microsoft Cloud compared with on-premises data centers. These gains can be as much as 93% for energy efficiency and 98% for carbon efficiency. They are partly due to Microsoft's use of renewable energy. The computer industry is a big user of electricity, a big user of energy. And that has been undergoing change. The first computer I ever worked with, I'm a retired computer engineer. The first computer I ever worked with had air conditioners cooling it, and it had 16 kilobytes of core, which is iron donuts that were stitched together. And when that core was first produced, it cost about $1 a bit, which meant that a byte of memory cost $8. And a 16 kilobyte memory system cost $128,000. Today, obviously, you know, I've bought 32 gigabyte micro SD cards for something on the order of $12 plus shipping. And you know, the drop in costs, the drop in cost of what they call a gigaflop, I mentioned last week on the show. A gigaflop in 1961, the equipment used to produce a gigaflop, which is 1 billion floating point operations per second, doing mathematics, cost something like $157 billion. And by the time I was seriously into microcomputer engineering, the cost of a gigaflop had dropped to about $150,000, and according to Wikipedia, now it's 3 cents. The amount of electricity that is used has similarly declined. In those days, that first computer I worked with, which was capable of doing several hundred floating point operations per second, had to be cooled by 3 air conditioners. The computer that I do my blog on is a Raspberry Pi, and it is about the size of a thick deck of cards, and it uses actually typically less than 4 watts of power. It's not it is the fastest Raspberry Pi I've got. I've got more than one, but the least use of energy out of any of the computers that I've got is about 0.4 of a watt, which means that you could run it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year for a normal business operation on less than 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, which, you know, running that old machine that I first came across would probably have been consumed in a minute. The use of energy has changed for large installations much faster than it has for small ones. So Microsoft is saying in this particular report that energy efficiency, they're talking about a huge reduction in what is currently used in the cloud servers compared to what is currently used at home or in a business. Again, the computer that I was using before the Raspberry Pi, That computer used about 120 watts. The Raspberry Pi, which by the way is much faster, uses, as I said, a little less than 4. And that kind of usage is still going on. I have appeared on this show from time to time with a small Raspberry Pi computer and monitor combined, and I measured that recently with its most efficient computer on it, and it ran at approximately 3 watts with the monitor. Things are changing. We're seeing a reduction in use, and these big data centers, which use an amount of energy that's similar to what might be used by a small city, we might expect that in the next 10 years they'll be using perhaps 10 to 20% of what they're using now. And in fact, we've seen clear indications that that is the case. Okay, the next item we've got still on Saturday, May 19th, is from Wind Power Engineering, and we have a picture here of a Lake Michigan lighthouse. Consumer Energy and DTE Energy, that's Detroit, announced new goals in Michigan of 50% clean energy by 2030. The aim is to achieve this target through a combination of renewable investments of at least 25% and energy efficiency, also at least 25%. They will be retiring coal-burning power plants, replacing them with wind and solar, and they've actually already started closing the coal-burning power plants. This is something that is going to be ongoing. That picture, by the way, is, as I said, a lighthouse on Lake Michigan, and it doesn't have anything to do with the story aside from the fact that it's a lighthouse on Lake Michigan. But it looks nice, so that's why it's there. Okay, we are up to Sunday, May 20th, and we have an item from theindependentbd.com, which is hard to read because it's just a jumble of letters. Global warming is on track to cause a major wipeout of insects, compounding already severe losses, according to a new analysis. Insects are vital in most ecosystems, and a widespread collapse would cause extremely far-reaching disruption to life on Earth. Scientists warn that much more carbon needs to be cut than nations have promised. This is something that I have reported on a number of occasions. There was a report a couple of months ago about a large census of flying insects in refuges in Germany that found that their populations had declined by 75% over a 40-year period. This is reflected in similar declines among animals in general. The World Wildlife Fund has talked about a 60% decline in wildlife populations over a period of 40 years. The Royal Society for Protection of Birds has talked about a 70% decline in seabird populations over a 60-year period. What we're seeing is the numbers of animals falling by about 2% or more per year on a year-to-year basis, so that today we have only a small fraction of the number of animals that we had only only when I was a child. When I was a child, I used to go out and see huge numbers of swallows flying around, resting on the telephone lines. They would rest on 3 stretches of telephone lines, covering them completely. When my daughter was a child in the same place, they covered about less than a third of that. It was about half of one of those 3 power lines. When I left that house in New Hampshire where I lived in 2004 to move to Brattleboro, there were none left. This is something that's going on all through nature, and it is a serious problem that is already having it is being played out in agriculture, and it is being played out elsewhere. And we have to recognize animals and plants are affected by pollution the same way human beings are. And the World Health Organization says we're losing 7 million people a year because of air pollution. And that, by the way, is an amount that's fairly closely comparable to the number of armed service personnel who died each year during the Second World War. The number of people in the United States, according to a study from MIT that happened last year, is 200,000 a year. That is by far the most conservative study I have seen. And I should point out, doing this blog for 6 years, I have looked at many, many articles. Every day I put up 10 to 15 articles. Those 10 to 15 articles each, I have to look through about 30 headlines to find those articles. That means I have to look through several hundred articles typically per day, and several hundred times the 2,000 some odd days that I've done this. It comes to maybe 800,000 articles that I have looked at the headlines of, and the materials that I've been seeing speak abundantly about excuse me, a series of problems that go through the earth, but also they speak to the ways that we can get out of that, that we can address those problems. We have to go further than the nations have promised. This is something that has been acknowledged by it's been uniformly acknowledged by scientists. Our next item comes from RT Insights. The alternate energy revolution based on such renewable energy as wind, solar, and geothermal being fed into the overall electric grid is reviving an argument Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla had over a century ago. The grid supplies AC power, but renewable energy sources such as solar and batteries are DC. And this is a changeover that is having an effect locally within people's homes. We have increasing use of DC power in the home. It's not just batteries and flashlights. Computers internally use DC power. Cell phones are powered by DC power. There are a lot of things that can be powered by DC power. On the other hand, excuse me, if you want to transmit power over a very long distance, it turns out that it is far more efficient to transmit DC power using modern equipment than it is to use AC power. That is the reverse of the situation that existed at the time that Tesla and Edison were arguing over this particular issue. In those days, it was really, really difficult to change the voltage using DC, but it was easy using AC. Now we can change the voltage using DC fairly easily because we've got more modern equipment. And the latest statistic I saw, which is going to about 20 years old, says that for AC power, the greatest distance at which it can be transmitted cost effectively is about 2,500 miles. For DC power, it's 4,000. But there have been upgrades since then, and honestly, I think it's fairly clear today that you can transmit power cost effectively from any part of the planet to any other part of the planet if you've got power lines in place to do that. We are up to Monday, May 21st. And we have an article from Solar Magazine. I'll put this up. I'll tell you what. That picture that I just put up is monarch butterflies. And that had to do with the article that I just read about insect populations. I'll put it up so people can see it. And why some of those butterflies are white and why some of them are orange colored, I don't know, but that's the way the picture came through, associated with that story in the independent BD.com. But the picture that we're interested in now is this, and this is from May 21st, Solar Magazine. I'll read the synopsis here. Qualcomm Inc. has been developing motor vehicle static charging technology with major car manufacturers for the past 7 years. The company announced that its system is expected to be commercially available on EVs within 2 years, based on the fact that the cost of static wireless charging is now comparable with conductive charging. Now, what does that have to do with the picture? Actually, it has nothing to do with the picture. This picture is a picture of a solar roadway, and if you look at the roadway closely, you'll see that it seems to be organized into cells. I'll put that up again. That is a roadway which will make electricity when it's organized on a grid, and cars can drive on it. But what the article is talking about is a different kind of system where a charging technology is embedded in the roadway itself. Different kind of roadway than this. So, sorry about that for confusion, but that's the picture that came with the article, and I thought it was worthwhile taking a look at the picture, so I stuck it up. Okay, our next item is from Singleton Argus. After months of pressure from the Australian government, either to keep the old coal-fired plant open longer than planned or to sell it to someone who will, the AGL board has decided to proceed with the original plan to close it. AGL is a large utility in Australia. AGL said that an offer it got was in the best interest of neither the company nor its shareholders. And I have to tell you, I don't have to tell you, but to tell you the truth, what I'm gathering is the Australian federal government is furious because this is a big this is the Liddell coal-fired plant that they're closing down, and the Australian government has been putting pressure on AGL for months, perhaps for years, to make sure that that plant would stay open, which provides jobs, of course, for the people who work in the plant and for coal miners. But the problem is that AGL wants to use that site for a battery, and argues that the coal-burning power plant that's sitting there is not going to have a future. So the government tried to broker an offer to AGL, which, as I recall, was $350 million for the purchase of the old coal-fired plant, and I think that would be Australian dollars, which would mean about $225 million American. But AGL said no, that is not going to sway it either to keep the plant open or to sell it to somebody who would. And so what we're seeing, and this, by the way, also is one of those news stories that just has been coming up and coming up and coming up, because it turns out that there have been unions that have been very much in favor of seeing this plant closed, because the replacement energy that's going to be produced to replace the plant will require that people be employed building solar farms, wind farms, maintaining the solar and wind farms, building geothermal plants, and so forth. And there's a lot of activity that's going to be produced by replacing that coal-burning plant. So there's a lot of people who want to see it stay on track to close. And interestingly, AGL, which owns it, wants to close it. They just said they don't see any future for that plant. The next item we have is from Clean Technica, still Monday, May 21st. Sales of BMW electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles are up more than 49% year over year in 2018. BMW's EV sales are up nicely so far this year, 73% in the United States and 25% in the UK. But EV sales have surged far more in China, where sales are up 646%, thanks largely to new, locally produced plug-in hybrid electric version of its 5 Series sedan. The Chinese are buying something over 40% of all electric vehicles that are produced worldwide. And they are making a lot of electric vehicles. They are also producing by far most of the electric buses. The United States produces about 1,000 electric buses a year. China produces about 100,000 electric buses. The electric buses cost about 60% more than diesel-powered buses of about the same size in the same country, but they pay for themselves in 6 years or so. And so the Chinese are well ahead of the United States in terms of electric vehicles in general. And it is really, well, they're also ahead with a bunch of other things, including the manufacture of solar panels and so forth. And one of the things the Trump administration has tried to do with its trade war is prevent excess Chinese goods from inexpensive Chinese goods from entering the United States, but we don't have replacements for them in the United States. We aren't manufacturing the electric vehicles, we aren't manufacturing the solar panels and so forth. Meantime, China has a really interesting approach to this. When they were hit with a tariff on solar panels, they said, that's okay, we'll sell them in the third world. And they had already been offering solar panels in the third world on a utility scale basis, telling countries that were buying them. They weren't particularly worried about the country's ability to pay for them because the purchase of these panels would be financially good for them. And when people defaulted, when countries defaulted, the Chinese had a simple solution. They went, for example, to Sri Lanka and said, that's okay, you can default. We'll take a port instead and use it for commercial and military use. And they have extended their military sites all over the world to places that are very close to the United States, places like the Dominican Republic. And I think the Trump administration is losing a trade war by putting itself into a militarily inferior position. This is not making America great again. Anyway, we are up to Tuesday, May 22nd. We've got a slide here of Arcadia National Park. I'll put that up. The title of this article, which comes from Grist, is Officials Tried to Censor a Report on National Parks. Here's what it was in it. Now, this is another article on the same report that I talked about just a few minutes ago, but it has more information about what is actually in the report. And of course, there's a link to the report, so you can go look at it if you want to slog through that. It's not as bad as a lot of reports, but the Trump administration attempted to release a report from the National Park Service about dangers to national parks from rising sea levels, with all references to climate change removed. It identified human-caused climate change as the main culprit behind rising sea levels. Again, this is more or less a repeat of that earlier report, except that in this particular case, the link I provided will give you more information written from a somewhat different point of view. I'm going to leave that picture up because the next item, which comes from the Western Journal, speaks to the same report. A University of Colorado research scientist said she was, quote, extremely happy, end quote, with the National Park Service, when the National Park Service released a study on sea level rise, even though it, quote, probably destroyed, end quote, her career doing agency research. Mariah Caffrey refused to accept NPS corrections that are said to have removed words from linking global warming to human activity. She refused to accept these, and whether she did it or somebody else did it, they were restored. Her position prevailed. And by the way, I want to mention something here, and that is, I went to the EPA site in connection with this news item. I go to the EIA, Energy Information Administration site, frequently. I go to the FEMA site, that's the Federal Energy Management Agency, and fairly frequently. But I don't go to the EPA site very often unless I've got a specific page on that site that I want to go to. I went to that site and I found on I think it was the home page for that site, there was an item that I could click on that was transportation and climate change. And when I went to that page on transportation and climate change, one of the things that I noticed, well, the page says, basically, we're producing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is causing climate change. This is the EPA, which is being run by Scott Pruitt, who was appointed by Donald Trump and approved by a strongly Republican Senate. On that same page were a pair of links. One of them said, if you are looking for something that you can't find here, here are links that have been removed. And another one was a link to the EPA site, full site, as it existed on the 11th of January 2017, just before Donald Trump and his administration started to change the site. So the EPA is making it possible for people to take a look at the information that has, according to people who are very upset, simply vanished. Well, in a sense it has vanished, but they've also kept it there. Again, I'm wondering what's going on in Washington. Okay, the next item is from Forbes. The power producers are pushing to build natural gas plants and pipelines to replace retiring coal, but in less than 10 years, much of that infrastructure will be more expensive to operate than the cost to build new renewables, analysis released by the Rocky Mountain Institute says. That would leave investors saddled with billions of dollars in stranded assets. Yes, this is an important article. It's very worthwhile reading. Again, this is one of those articles that has just been all over the internet. Basically, what has happened is the cost of wind power, the cost of solar power, the cost of batteries, and particularly now the cost of batteries, because it turns out that a battery can support itself buying and selling power to and from a grid that's powered by fossil fuels. They're all going down so fast that they've already started to undercut natural gas. I think the bottom is going to fall out of the natural gas facility construction fairly soon. Not that I am the world's best expert on the subject, but that's the feeling that I've got. Sometimes I'm right, once in a while. Okay, I'm up to Wednesday, May 23rd. I've got an item from Energy Manager Today. That is a picture of a wind farm. We'll put it up. And what this article says is the American Wind Energy Association says the number of contracts signed for wind power projects hit a record of 3,500 megawatts during the first quarter of 2018, a possible predictor of a strong year for wind power. Among the news items it cited was an announcement by Pacific Corp of a plan to build a $2 billion wind farm in Wyoming. Now, what I've been saying is the cost of renewable power has been going down. I should point one thing out, and that is gas-powered power plants take time to build. There's a lot of planning involved. There's a lot of permitting involved. This is true of wind farms too, but it takes time and money, considerably more money, to get those plants online. A wind power plant can start generating power when the first turbine goes up, if it's designed to do that. By contrast, basically with a natural gas plant, you have to get the whole plant built before you can make power. The plants that are going up this year were ordered several years ago at a time when the price of natural gas in the United States was depressed due to fracking. And so there are a lot of natural gas plants that are in late production stages right now. And they will be coming online this year, many of them, and it is thought that this year will be the first year since 2013 that natural gas will beat out renewables in general for the amount of capacity that's installed. But that, according to this, will not last. And according to the Rocky Mountain Institute and so forth, this is kind of a last hurrah for natural gas. From Clean Technica, we have this item. The Netherlands has announced that it will ban the use of coal for electricity generation from 2030 onwards, and that the 2 oldest plants must close by the end of 2024. German utility company RWE has deemed the plan, quote, ill-judged, end quote, but according to Carbon Tracker, over half of all European coal-burning power plants are losing money. I think that says a lot right there. By the way, today I noticed that the Germans have offered I think it was €1 billion to the nuclear plants that they have in Germany, because they have a planned closure coming up and they have to compensate them for that. Our last item today comes from the Portland Business Journal. The Oregon Public Utility Commission has declined to acknowledge a short list of 4 Wyoming wind power projects from a request of proposals by Pacific Corp, saying the process was not sufficiently competitive. Pacific Corp said it will move ahead with a $3.5 billion wind and transmission expansion anyway. Honestly, I don't know what to make of this particular item. It sounds like the Oregon Public Utility Commission is saying, we are not going to sanction that, you can't build it. And Pacific Corp is saying, well, we're going to build it. I don't know how much authority the Public Utility Commission has. I don't know, it may be that Pacific Corp has got a plan to change its position in a way that would be acceptable to the Public Utility Commission. But at any rate, Pacific Corp is has plans to put $3.5 billion into wind and transmission projects in the Northwest. There are larger projects that have been under development in the northwestern part of the United States, and I don't even know what the largest one is, but it may be one that was in Wyoming, which was intended to have transmission lines going to first a storage facility in Nevada, and then ultimately down to San Diego. Again, we're talking about long distance transmission, and the fact that that can be cost effective. If you think about it, from Wyoming to San Diego, you don't have to go that much farther to get from Wyoming to Vermont. But things are changing, and actually I guess we're at the end of the show, so I will say see you next time, or I hope you see us next time. I hope Tom is here next time. I spent too much time tripping over my tongue and looking like a deer in the headlights today. Tom is the one who usually looks like the deer in the headlights, because he's the one who takes care of switching on the photographs and so forth. But here it is, end of the show, and we hope you come back. See you later.